What, on all of the God Emperor's good, blessed, scorched brown earth could possibly make a human being choose to join this? I mean, it's hardly an inspirational career poster. Purely scenery-wise, it's a pinch vomitous. And the signing bonus, which promises an eternity of getting butt-fucked by a three-eyed rotting corpse, using fly vomit and general excretions as lubricants, well, one fondly imagines that this would not be the dream of a good solid majority of the human population, in 40k or otherwise. And yet, chaos never wants for recruits. So what is it exactly that makes somebody choose to join chaos? That is going to be the subject of today's video. And it is a long, laundry list of reasons. Fear, anger, hatred, greed, lust, despair, passion, and perhaps foremost amongst all, hope. These are but some of the pathways that can lead an otherwise God Emperor fearing man into the worship of the dark gods. In addition to this also, of course, comes those situations in which one simply does not have a whole lot of choice. Whether one is born in a chaos-controlled world and thus raised in a society and a situation in which the worship of the ruinous powers is simply the way life is lived. Or if one is captured by chaos raiders and press-ganged into a horde of cultists or into service aboard a chaos warship. In these extraordinary, or perhaps all too common, unfortunately, in the 41st millennium circumstances, well, worship of the gods is simply just a survival mechanism. And so we're not going to spend too much time talking about that. We are instead going to today primarily focus in on the reasons why and the temptations that makes somebody choose to worship the ruinous powers when one has, by any reasonable standard, a plethora of other options. Let us start with perhaps the most subtle, the most insidious of them all, and the one that we can see quite a bit of traces of in our own world as well. Hope. Admittedly, hope is not an emotion usually connected with the chaos gods, but that is exactly why it is so insidious, and it goes beyond simply just a hope for salvation. For example, one might embrace Nurgle's rot simply just to make the pain end, to finally become free of disease, to become the master of death rather than its fearful servants. But this too isn't really hope. It is submission. It is despair. And grabbing on to any iota of salvation that one can find. So when I speak about hope here, it's not that kind of hope. It's not the hope of being saved from a whirring chain axe, or the hope of randomly growing wings and flapping to one's safety after falling off a cliff or anything. I am talking about the hope for a better tomorrow, the idealistic kind of hope, the rejection of the fact that reality is just suffering and struggle and endless fighting for the right simply to exist in an uncaring galaxy that wishes with every iota of its being to see humanity destroyed. For the 41st millennium is a really shit place to live. In most circumstances, as we've talked about on many occasions previously, there are definitely some places that aren't active nightmares. But for a lot of the Imperium's population, reality is oppressive, reality is painful, and reality seems utterly immutable and unchanging. Yet inherent within every human, as a baseline for the human condition, one could easily even argue, lies the hope that tomorrow will somehow become better, the urge to strive forwards. And in the majority of human history, that has been an admirable urge. But in the 41st millennium, it can be dangerous. It can be disruptive to the status quo of the Imperium. And the Imperium, for all of its flaws, has somehow managed to survive 10,000 years of what is, in essence, a steady, inevitable collapse. And one must remember, by the way, that one shouldn't focus solely on the collapse of the Imperium. Has it gotten weaker? Yes. Has technology regressed? Absolutely. Has the government of the Imperium grown less effective? Holy hell, yes. But the Imperium is still there, despite every effort from countless Xenos races, from the forces of chaos itself, and their innumerable minions and demons. The Imperium persists. That alone is an incredible achievement, to the point that the Imperium, in and of itself, legitimizes its own existence and its right to continue to exist. But that indomitable human spirit that has seen humanity survive for so long, well, its spark of innovation does not simply disappear. This is where we can draw a fascinating parallel to our own world. Take, for example, the unending debate over nuclear power on our Earth. There are largely two sides of this argument. The first looks at nuclear power and thinks, wow, magic glowing rocks that boil water near infinitely and can produce fantastical quantities of power? Holy hell, this is the salvation of humanity and the solution to all of our power needs. And the other side that goes, yeah, but sometimes they go kaboom. Really, really loudly, and it's not worth the risk. Today, there are about 440 nuclear power plants across the Earth. Since we started using them on a proper scale, there have been 2 major accidents, classified as Level 7 accidents. Those were the Chernobyl disaster in 1986 and the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident in 2011. Over the course of all of the years that we've operated nuclear reactors across the globe, there have been, on the scale from 0, nothing happened whatsoever really, up to small anomalies and accidents, on serious accidents with injuries and even fatalities, we've had a grand total of 40-odd mishaps over hundreds of reactors for, well, the better part of a century now. All in all, excluding Russian construction standards and the Japanese's baffling insistence to build their nuclear power plants on active fault lines, well, nuclear reactors have proven to be pretty safe. And we do need the power. Everyone agrees on that, at least. So why, then, is there still such a zealous resistance against nuclear power? Now, we could launch into a whole-ass discussion here about certain influence groups, paid by certain nations and so on. But we shan't. We shall instead bring this back to the point of it, Warhammer 40,000, as I believe there is something not inherent, not universal, but something within a very large percentage of human beings that causes them to reject the good enough solution simply because it is not a perfect solution. We indeed, of course, have popular sayings about this. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. We wouldn't have this saying if it wasn't used to remind ourselves that, sometimes, so long as it gets the job done, that is, in fact, all you needed to do. But as we can see across human society right now, that is not always the case. I mean, to take a slightly broader perspective on things, we live in, well, what used to be anyways, a golden age. I firmly believe we're exiting it at rather significant velocity at the moment, but we used, at least, to live in an age of unrivaled opulence and peace as well, the likes of which we had probably never seen on Earth. A period where more people could live happier, longer lives than at, well, any point prior in history. Yet, look at the civilizations that caused all of this, that built all of this, our modern-day democracies today, and tell me that we're all happy with what we achieved. Yes, there does seem to be something that makes us look at a near-perfect situation and still actively reject it. So if we were to take this little experiment, this thought, this theory, and place it in the 41st millennium, where life is very, very far from perfect indeed, would we not see this exact thing? The Imperium is stagnant. It's not going to get any better. The best you can hope for, in fact, is that it won't get any worse. And this is irrespective of how bad your current situation is. You could be an Adeptus Mechanicus drone, slaving away at a conveyor belt for 12 hours every day, eating nothing but recyclated human feces. You would have no hope of your material situation improving. Not realistically, not within several generations at least, as we talked about in the Citizen of the Imperium video. Or you could be a farmer on an agri-world, a fairly blessed existence by 41st millennium standards. But again, your prospects for the future are quite narrow, and are probably measured on a generational scale rather than your own swift rise through the system. If indeed the possibility to rise even exists at all. Now, regardless of whether or not this sense of absolute stagnation is real, or merely perceived as such, it is easy to understand why one would view this as a hopeless situation. Especially as we, of course, judge any situation from our immediate perspective. Sure, being a day worker on an agri-world might seem pretty hopeless to you, but well, when you find yourself a few weeks later placed in a slave pit aboard a dark Eldar Corsair, your definition of hopeless is going to change somewhat. It does not, however, change the feeling of hopelessness. So, if again our little idea here that people will willingly reject good enough in order to strive for something greater, well, in the case of the Imperium, there is absolutely another choice. Chaos. Now, it might again seem rather ridiculous. Chaos is blatantly worse than the Imperium in every way. It's probably going to treat you a hell of a lot worse. You're probably going to die brutally whilst worshipping it, and even joining it or finding somebody who will introduce you to its mysteries is unfathomably risky in and of itself. But hope for the Imperium is finite. Even if it holds on for another 10,000 years, there appears to be no possibility whatsoever that the Imperium will somehow be able to emerge victorious. It seems to be a literal physical impossibility for it to do so, as the Eye of Terror can never be successfully invaded. At the very least, not without GW pulling some serious nonsense out of their assholes. Whereas Chaos, theoretically, Chaos has no boundaries. Chaos has no absolute failure state. Oh, well, that depends somewhat as well, as the entire Eldar plan to let Chaos win the Imperial Civil War was for Chaos then to burn itself out, which I don't even know how that would have worked. It is one of the dumber parts of the Horus Heresy, in my opinion, as it also assumes that the Eldar could somehow have survived the ensuing conflagration. Especially as the galaxy at that point would be roamed by enormous numbers of Legion-strength Slaneshi Marines who'd have a vested interest in discovering their craft worlds and grinding them up into a fine, snortable powder, but let's not get into that here. So, Chaos promises a form of hope, even if one could happily argue that it is majoritively illusionary, even if one could easily argue again that it would be damnation by any and all metrics, yet nevertheless, Chaos retains that 0.00000 many zeros, 0.1% chance of something better. And it doesn't even need to say what that something better is. That is, again, what makes it so insidious. What is better for you is entirely relative. And it might even be something that Chaos can promise you directly. We're not talking about things like growing into a 12-foot tall immortal demon with a fiery sword here. We are merely thinking of something like, there is a deity out there. And if you pray to him, if you offer him a cow or a pig or whatever, or simply just a part of your recycled garbage by a little altar, a little known altar out of the way, then your chances of getting promoted increases. Maybe joining a certain secret society has been a long-known way to get in with the bosses at work. Maybe offering up a grox every now and then to a altar deep inside of the woods will provably see the number of attacks of wild animals against your flock decrease drastically. It doesn't matter what it is. Hope is as constant a companion to humanity as is fear, as is anger, as is lust or hate. And whilst those other emotions are, in many cases, obviously destructive, something you should always guard against, and something that the Imperium goes to great lengths to explain to everyone that they should guard against, hope? It's significantly harder to put a negative spin on hope. Now, of course, this is not to say that all hope leads to chaos either. We're not quite there just yet. I am merely stating that this, and a seemingly rather natural part of the human spirit that we can demonstrably see in enormous numbers of people, even in our own far, far more paradise-esque times, well, hope could be used as a vector for something far deeper. As another great big part of how chaos corrupts people is that it doesn't start with the big ask. Let us move on from hope now and into something more generalistic, something more closely connected to the gods themselves. Escalating corruption. We have talked on occasions previously about the precise corrupting powers of chaos. We can quite evidently see that chaos is not merely just some form of psychological indoctrination. It isn't something that you are necessarily convinced into. It can be, but we can also see that chaos actually does corrupt, that there is something physical, something real, something that actually does exist that twists the minds of men, unless extreme precautions are taken to protect against this corruption. The corruption, mind you, is not absolute. There are safeguards one can take in order to protect oneself against it. For example, as we saw in Gaunt's Ghost, the armor of contempt allowed Gaunt and his men to remain sane and non-corrupted on a world simply soaked in chaos for far longer than anyone believed to be possible. The survivors in the Untowards, too, managed to live on a planet absolutely drowning in this influence without seemingly being influenced by it in turn. And I do not buy the moth poison explanation either, just by the by. The Inquisition didn't buy it, but it's the kind of thing that you sort of kind of just have to investigate on the off molecule small chance that it actually is true. But we are now, with the corrupting power of chaos, kind of veering back towards in the territory of you can't necessarily help it style of corruption. So instead, let's talk about how even the most heinous of acts could become normal given enough time. There is a beautiful example of this in the Liber Chaotica, my preferred source when talking about chaos. It speaks of a high noble somewhere in, I believe, the Border Princes, if my memory serves me correctly. This high noble wanted for nothing. He was rich, wealthy, established, and respected. His journey towards chaos began simply by enjoying things, by taking extra pleasure in the food that he ate, in the music that he listened to, in the feminine company that he kept. He discovered certain potions, rituals, certain prayers that would make food taste better, certain spices imported at ruinous expense from the far north that gave extra zest to every bite of luxurious bacon. This man didn't start doing any of this because he wanted to be a demon prince. He didn't start doing any of this because he wanted power or a better tomorrow or anything. He simply was given the option of, hey, would you like your bacon to taste better? And he said yes. What's wrong with that? Indeed, it is the argument he uses during a series of interviews with a witch hunter who's trying to figure out why this person who had everything, talent, position, wealth, would become a heretic? What tempted him so? And the key part here is that every time he enjoyed one of these extravagancies, it became, well, normal to him. Once he'd had that special spice enough times, well, it's just spice. There was a time in human history where salt was worth its weight in gold, where pepper even more so. Spices from the Far East that had to be imported to Europe or to Rome during its zenith cost an arm and a leg, and then some. Yet today, we put salt on everything. We put salt on our eggs and bacon, we salt our soups, we put salt on our french fries, etc., etc., etc. And sure, you notice it's there. You obviously prefer to have salt in your food, if you're a normal human being, that is, I'd imagine. And if it was simply taken away from you, you would miss it, but it's nothing wondrous. Yeah, it's nothing amazing. It's a very different experience compared to the first time you had it. Or sweets is another wonderful example of this. When we first started importing chocolate to Europe, it was an aphrodisiac. People went mad horny with just chocolate because we had no tolerance of it. We had not experienced it. And so the naturally aphrodisiac elements in chocolate affected us far more heavily. We can also see this in things like an addiction to sugar, for example. If you were to cut sugar out of your diet entirely, and you were months later to eat something like a carrot or an apple, it would taste sweet, nearly unbearably so, because you no longer have that saturation of your taste buds that sugar gives you. Now, of course, this sensation is yet further heightened, enormously so, in a world in which magic is real, in which that special northern spice, created by grinding baby livers into a powder or whatever, and then cursing it with a shamanic spell or something, well, it tastes amazing. It tastes like nothing you've ever had. It's mind-blowing. But eventually, it becomes normal. And a part of the curse or Slanesh is to make you remember how amazing it was the first time, and make you forever chase that high yet again. We see something similar in drug addicts, where many people who can become addicted to drugs will start off on something relatively benign, but then they will seek that experience of the first time, that amazing first time high that they never quite managed to recreate since. And so they'll try something heavier and heavier and heavier. Addictions to various opioids or painkillers are another example of this. But in the case of Warhammer and 40k, the taste, well, it quite literally comes from the pain, from the excess. One might begin with the ground baby liver salt, but then that doesn't quite cut it anymore. And so you escalate. Now you start eating, well, just literal babies, I guess. I kind of didn't really leave myself a whole lot of options to escalate here when I started out with grinding babies into a powder. But you get the general drift. And this will then be repeated again and again in every form of pleasure, be it sexual, be it sport, be it competition. Any high can be heightened by simply committing yourself more deeply to this deity, until, of course, at the end, your entire life is just grey. You've done everything, you've experienced it all, and now it's all tasteless, it's all scentless. You can't get a feeling of euphoria anymore, no matter what you do, unless, of course, you do something even more extreme. This is how a count that salted his potatoes a little bit too much one day ends up fucking a severed head in the middle of the town square. And there are, of course, several other flavors of such subtlety as well. Take a warrior, a soldier, a fighter. If you keep fighting for long enough and you get good enough at it, there's every possibility that you start taking joy in it. Start feeling a sense of accomplishment and pride in what you are doing. This does not necessarily need to be anything bad. There are countless Space Marine chapters out there that are very proud of their ability to smite the Xenos. There are endless numbers of Imperial Guard regiments that take justifiable pride in their martial accomplishments, of course. But there is also an element of this where you eventually begin to worship the act itself, not the cause, as that is a vital difference. Carrying out an act of great violence for a just cause is very different to killing just for the fun and the rush of it. This is also where we might get into the very long debate of what exactly powers the gods, as I am, of course, of the opinion that whilst even an act of self-defense would give a degree of power to Khorne, he cares not from whence the blood flows and so on, but it seems sensible to believe that he would gain infinitely less power from someone shooting a man, assaulting him, and then feeling bad about it afterwards, compared to a man who kills in the name of Khorne, specifically for his glory. It just seems sensible, doesn't it? And so that extra layer of pretense, you can call it that if you so wish, is a protective mechanism. When an Imperial Guardsman kills an enemy, he does it for the Emperor. This makes it an act still of violence, and still something that empowers Khorne, but again, infinitely less so than if he were to do it for Khorne. Because if that was not the case, then why the hell would Khorne even want disciples? If any act of vengeance, regardless of purpose or intent, empowered him, why the hell would he even bother having armies? Why would his demons carry swords into combat to spill blood? You'd think, if anything, his demons would simply just be clouds of annoying gnats, driving people mad until they cap their neighbors and then themselves. But chipping away at that pretense is, of course, one of the things that Khorne would like to do. Finding reasons or arguments or temptations for why you should offer up a kill to a minor deity, or something else than the Imperium, something totally innocent, of course, completely unconnected to any dark and terrible entities in the warp. This, too, is the reason why we see many examples, both in Warhammer Fantasy and 40k, of the gods using intermediaries, creating minor deities that are, in essence, them, but aren't explicitly them. Because a little bit of extra power is better than none at all, of course. And sometimes some of these deities can be quite subtle. We have brought up the examples previously of certain Imperial Guard regiments, for example, that were levied successfully into the Imperial Guard and largely trusted until it was revealed that that local tribal deity that demanded the skulls of their slain foes, well, it wasn't the Emperor, let's just put it like that. And this also leads us to yet another form of corruptive influence. Power. See, chaos doesn't have to be subtle. We've spent the last 30-odd minutes talking about the subtle approaches of chaos, how it teases, it invites, it lowers barriers and chips away at resolve. That is not all that chaos is. Equally frequently, chaos will simply be brazen about it. It will announce loudly and clearly, I am a warrior god. I will make you a greater warrior. I will give you power. I will give you abilities beyond that of your fellow man, whether that be in the case of intrigue, in the form of Zinch, in the case of brawn, in the case of corn, or in the ability to have an endless harem of four-legged women, in the case of Slanesh, etc., etc. And of course, the ultimate temptation atop all of this is the lure of immortality. For what man wouldn't want to live forever, especially as a demigod incarnation of your greatest vice? A 13-cocked giant goat monster with a vagina, just on top of everything else. Or the 15-foot-tall monster demon with the flaming sword. Or the indestructible Nurglicht entity made up of 1,000,000 flies that can never die, and so on and so on. It is a simple promise in many ways, but it is a very good one, isn't it? Power and immortality. And unlike other gods, be they Sigma or the Emperor, who can only promise theoretical immortalities, to be remembered or honored forever, etc., living on in the memories of the Imperium or your kin, the Chaos Gods can actually give you all of those things, and they are willing to demonstrate their ability to do so. You might even have seen one of these immortal entities while serving in a chaos cult. You might have understood the nature of the warp and how it is, in essence, eternal. Or you yourself may have been blessed with a mutation. Obviously, a warrior would see the advantage of having an enormous right arm that never tires. In fact, a worshipper of Slanesh might see the advantages in that too. This as well is the reason why so very, very vanishingly few ever turn away from the path of chaos. Partially, of course, it's because that by the time you've actually got a giant hand with spikes coming out of the back of it, the Imperium is unlikely to welcome you back with open arms, so it's a sunk cost fallacy now. You've got to keep going down the path you're chosen because there is no turning back, and also it's because it is evidence that what you are doing, well, it is working. You are approaching closer to your objective. Becoming a god, or as close as makes little difference, is absolutely possible. It is something you can achieve, and you have the physical proof of that right in front of you. That is an intoxicating feeling. And well, the consequences for failure, they're pretty harsh. In fact, getting executed by the Imperium is probably one of the better ways out, as the other one is being turned into a horrific chaos spawn, a mindless, gurgling, forever cursed entity, driven mad by its own inadequacies, being caught and trapped in your own madly mutated, desiccated flesh for an eternity until somebody puts you out of their misery. The ladder towards demonhood is a long one, and it is a treacherous one. and any slip might send you spiraling down into actual literal damnation, so you had better cling on to those rungs and climb faster still. Now, the reasons for climbing those steps, we've covered a few already. Subtle temptations, or simply just a lust for power or immortality. But we also have others, things like despair, Nurgle's favorite tool of conversion. You see, Nurgle's plagues aren't really meant to kill people. That's a nice benefit, obviously, and it has self-evident strategic advantages for his servants in wartime, duh. But the death of the citizens is not the goal of Nurgle's plague. Nurgle's plague is as much a psychological one as it is a physical and a viral one. Oh, well, technically, Nurgle has countless plagues, so some of them are going to be one or the other as well. But his greatest plague, the Rot, is as much magical and mental as it is physical. It is designed to drive the host mad with despair, to show them every horror they could possibly imagine, to show them the flesh slothing off their bones in rivers, until the only thing they can think of is making it all just end. And once they've reached that point is the moment when they realize, as if a bolt from a blue sky, a eureka moment, the plague is eternal. The disease is eternal. It does not fear death. It is not in pain. The disease is not suffering. It is thriving. If only I could be more like it. And turns out, you can. You can indeed. Which is why somebody might choose to join the picture we started the video with. I mean, look at them. They're happy, aren't they? Smiling, grinning, and laughing, giggling, as they all roll in the great-grandfather's juices. And it certainly is a preferable fate to wasting away to a disease that will take months to kill you, against which all medicine is utterly helpless. As we talked about earlier, hope is highly relative. We should also probably mention that another way of surrender and chaos corruption is, of course, just the people who like this stuff, too. No matter how twisted it might seem, there's gonna be somebody out there who looks at scenes from Khorne or Nurgle or Slaanesh or Tzeentch and thinks, I could beat off to that. And those people, well, would we say that they were corrupted by the Chaos Gods? Or perhaps it would be more accurate to simply say that they willingly surrendered to the Chaos Gods. Not for any greater purpose, not for any specific aim, like a promotion, or living a longer, happier life, or enjoying the food, or salvation from a plague or a disease, but just simply because, deep down, they themselves, too, are just broken. The maniacs, the crazy people, the ones that just want to watch the world burn and would prefer a ringside seat. Luckily, this particular flavor of lunatic is relatively rare, even in the 41st millennium, although I do imagine the percentage over there is Probably on the wrong side of uncomfortable anyways. But there are plenty of other crazy individuals who are made to fall due to other character flaws. You don't have to be the kind of pervert who chokes somebody to death in the back of a pickup truck just for shits and giggles to become a willing puppet of chaos. You could also have other idiotic beliefs or needs. Take Lorgar Aurelian, for example. One of my favorite whipping boys in the 41st millennium, because Lorgar's entire reason for turning to chaos, well, it's simply idiotic. It is weak. It is pathetic. Lorgar is by far the weakest of all the Primarchs, and one could certainly blame his parents for priming him to be this way, but at the end of the day, the only reason why Lorgar seeks out the gods and willingly submits himself to them is so that they can liberate him from accountability, can take all of the sins he has committed, all of the genocides he's carried out, all of the conquest, all of the murders, the killing, the destruction of property, of cities, of continents, and go, oh, no, Lorgar, you didn't do any of that. You are just a tool. So keep doing all of it for eternity, and we will continue to absolve you of all responsibility as the good little bludgeon you are. That was Lorgar's reason for seeking out the gods, as his other reasons are purely nonsensical, like the idea that humanity can only win with the gods, as that was another one of the rationales. The gods are eternal, all-powerful, invincible, and so humanity's only future are as servants to the four. We know this is not the case, because the gods themselves have told us. They feared the Emperor. He was their anathema. He was to be their death and destruction. And even if the Emperor was not, remember, the gods themselves are not immortal, endless entities. They are simply a reflection of our real world. Once upon a time, the Eldar wielded the warp as we might a chisel, or a gun, or a pen. They controlled it. The Old Ones before them controlled the warp to an even greater degree. They could actively form it and make it do whatever they wanted, because the warp can only exist because of us. It is our reflection, our servant. We are not its. But again, Lorgar simply wanted absolution for his perceived crimes, and the gods were more than happy to use his idiocy for their own advantage, of course. Not to mention, even if humanity could only survive through chaos, what kind of survival would that even be? We would not even be humanity anymore. The best we could hope for was to become some form of lesser demon, eternal servants in an endless war machine, in endless war games between the gods fought on a galactic level. How is that materially superior to the Imperium? How is it morally superior? How is it better in any way? Even if our existence was guaranteed to continue for all eternity, if we are little more than bullets in a gun to be fired endlessly, is that survival? Is that existence? Lorgar at least seemed to believe so. And again, if we were to believe the elves in the Horus Heresy, Lorgar was really taken for a ride on the whole eternal survival thing too, as he would have sacrificed humanity as but another log on the bonfire, the funeral fire of the Four. Many other emotions and instincts and falls are more obvious. Angron, for example. Angron should simply have been executed by the Emperor the moment he retrieved him. Or, best case scenario, torn the nails from his head. So what if it killed him? He was dead and worse already. One could easily make the same argument for Conrad Curse as well, though at least he hid his affliction a bit better. Whilst yet others were afflicted in more difficult to discern ways, like Magnus. Magnus was not corrupted by rage. He was not corrupted by idiocy, though one could argue that certainly played into things. He was corrupted by hubris. He believed that he knew everything, that he knew best, that he knew better than the Emperor, that he understood the warp more thoroughly than the entities that lived in it, even as he himself understood that there were things in the warp far beyond his capacity to understand. He described them as leviathan creatures of unfathomable power. Yet, again, in his infinite, nearly infantile hubris, the genuine belief that you have the entire universe figured out, believed these to simply be benevolent giants. Oh, Magnus. At least in his case, there was a great potential redemption arc story there, when he chose to not fight the wolves of Rus, when he attempted to simply surrender, in essence. Now, what Magnus should have done is simply allow himself to be taken away, actively, chastised his sons for resisting, or teleported himself up into orbit above one of the warships of the wolves, or killed himself, or escaped to fight against the forces now corrupting the Empire, fighting as, in essence, a renegade on the side of good. And Magnus would probably have done a lot of that were it not for the whole shards of Magnus nonsense, which this nonsense reminds me of the loyalty chips from Star Wars. The Disney retcon. In the original lore, when the clones turned traitor, they did so by choice, and understandably so. They believed that the Jedi had turned against the Republic. Their foremost loyalty was to the Republic. Order 66 was a legitimate order issued through the correct channels. There even existed a separate order to arrest the Chancellor, Palpatine, in case he turned against the Republic. They were simply just being good soldiers, misled, led astray, and used by a manipulative mastermind. And then we introduced the goddamn chips to deprive them of choice, to take away all morality from the situation, all subtlety. And we are doing the same to 40k, with the shards of Magnus and obviously the reflection cracked. The single worst entry in all of 40k lore to the entirety of the universe, not only destroying a fantastic potential for a long-term redemption arc for Fulgrim as well, but also ruining the surrender of it, the fault that Fulgrim made, the error he committed and finally understood to be an error. Instead, he just figured that, I might as well be a demon, I guess. And this, by the way, is why I have a special soft spot for renegade forces within the Imperium. See, sometimes chaos doesn't even really have to do anything. No grand ploys, no complex seductions, no in-depth plans, or even simply just preying upon weaknesses or traditions or anything like that. Sometimes the Imperium itself creates chaos worshippers. Not even in the hope way that we discussed earlier, but also in simply just being what it is. Now, it has to be that way. It is because it is that way that it has survived for as long as it has, despite all of its countless flaws. But sometimes people turn against it just because of its overbearing bureaucracy, its soul-crushing nature, and those who have the power to roam the stars freely, like Space Marine chapters or rogue traders or various high-ranking officers, will simply choose to not bother anymore. Perhaps they will see something that makes them give up on the Imperium, some atrocity so terrible that they decide that this is no longer a master worth serving. Or simply they get overwhelmed by the pointlessness of trying to play along with it. Luft Huron's astral claws are an excellent example of this. All Huron wanted was to be an effective servant of the Imperium. He wanted to secure his domain, to protect its inhabitants, and also to save the Tiger Claws. To do so, he had to have more than he did. He understood that he could not protect this region of space with the limited resources at his disposal. It was simply impossible. All that awaited him was a long, slow, painful, inevitable decline. And so he chose, after attempting to find other ways around it, to break with the Imperium. Not even publicly at first, not actively, in secret. He created more Astartes. He created his own army, the Tyrant's Guard, to fight on his behalf. He created his own Imperial Guard, in essence, strengthened planetary defense forces, built new warships, and created ever closer bonds with other Space Marine chapters as well. Luft Huron did not do these things out of, well, one could argue hubris, I suppose, believing that he knew better than the administratum, but well, he did in this case, or that he could achieve the impossible, which he did as well. He did not do this out of a dream of power either. There is no indicator that he did this for any other reason than genuine wishes to protect the Imperium. I suppose this doubles back once again to the argument about hope, doesn't it? Luft Huron saw a better tomorrow, a safer tomorrow. He knew he could create it. He had the power. He had the resources to do so. He could manage to do what the Imperium could not, what the Imperium would not. What the Imperium was either too stagnant or too bullheaded to even attempt. He could do it. But he'd have to play awfully fast and loose with the rules to do so. And in the end, it was his poor relationship with the administratum that eventually revealed his heresy. It wasn't even because of what he did, the heresy of creating a massive Astartes chapter, or of trying to create a secessionist empire, or anything. The reason why Luft Huron was denounced and invaded by the full might of the Imperium was because he refused to pay his taxes. And hey, I sympathize. God, do I sympathize. 4 times a year, my government asks me to pay my quarterly taxes, not to mention filling in your reporting papers to explain to the government, who already knows how much you owe them, by the way, how much you do owe them. And the only reason they do that is because they hope you'll fuck up, so that they can screw you over harder. Believe me, I feel the tug of chaos every time I have to do that. And Luft Huron, well, he didn't simply feel the tug, he elected to act upon it by getting himself a big old Molotov cocktail and going down to the governmental office responsible for demanding his tithes, and have issues with the men in charge. So there you have it. A series of reasons why some might fall to chaos, why some might pledge themselves to the ruinous powers. Everything from something as seemingly innocent as hope, to something as obviously bad as stacking skulls up at an altar deep in the jungle. To hubris, to simple helplessness, to crimes of passion, or long-considered schemes designed to crumble empires. As with the minor chaos gods, the only true consistent with chaos is that it is everything, all the time, to everyone. And that is what makes it such a dangerous, endless, and probably inevitable foe. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.